Hey everyone, welcome to online church service this morning. In case you don't know me, my name's Matt and I have the privilege of sharing with you this morning. I'll be continuing our series looking at the book of James, the wisdom of James, and I'll be focusing on humility and submission to God. We've been speaking out of James for a little while now, and a lot of people say that James is the Proverbs of the New Testament. He draws on a lot of Proverbs from obviously the Old Testament, and it's got a lot of wisdom and that sort of stuff in it, which is really, really cool, and it's a really good letter. And I'll be continuing to talking about humility because I think I'll be really good at talking about humility. That's a joke. So in James chapter 4, he talks about, at the start of the chapter, he's talking about submitting to God. And he kind of talks about we often get into fights and quarrels among us because we are essentially putting ourselves above others, and which is causing division and that sort of stuff. And then he says in chapter 4, verse 6, James says this, referencing Proverbs 3, verse 34, he says, God opposes the proud, but he shows favour to the humble. And later on in verse 10, he says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. And so the chapter kind of heading, even though that's not scripture, is submit yourself to God. And then he goes on to talk about being humble, and God will lift you up, being humble to God. And humility is the quality of having a modest or low view of one's importance. So kind of not really thinking you're that important. And it's hard to talk about humility without talking about pride. So if humility is having a low view of one's importance, then pride would be having a high view of your own importance. And in this context, I think it's putting God where he is and putting yourself where you are, and then being obedient to that. And not knowing that, that's God and I can just do what I want, but actually going with, if he's God and he's good and he loves me and he's for me and not against me, then I need to be obedient to that in everything I do. So it's about knowing where God is and then being obedient to that. So how is your humility gauge? Or how is your pride gauge? You know, there's a lot of prideful people in the Bible. We've got the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law. They were very prideful. They knew the Old Testament back to front. They knew all the laws and they followed them really well. There was one guy on the cross next to Jesus that was like, come on, Jesus, if you're the Son of God, if you're God, then get yourself off the cross and get us off the cross with you. So there's a lot of prideful people in the Bible. And there's also a lot of humble people in the Bible too. In Numbers 12:3, it says that Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Moses, and then later on it says that God speaks face to face with Moses, which is a pretty awesome thing because he was humble. King David was also humble, although he still did a lot of really bad stuff. He was humble in that he followed God and served God as best he can all the days of his life. One of the other guys on the cross, there was one guy saying, come on, Jesus, get yourself off the cross. And the other guy was saying, be quiet. We're here because we deserve this punishment, but he's innocent and he doesn't. And then he says, Jesus, I believe in you. And then Jesus says, one day you'll be with me in paradise. He knew who God was and he knew who he was. Another very humble person in the Bible was Paul. Paul, he's done a lot. He's planted a lot of churches. But instead of saying, I've planted a lot of churches, I'm this and I'm that, and I've healed these people, I've done this, he just says, I am the worst of sinners. I am the chief sinner. So he knows where he stands, that he is a sinner. And Jesus is obedient. It says in Philippians 2:8, and being found in appearance of a man, he humbled himself by being obedient to death, even death on a cross. So who do you identify with in all those things? Do you sometimes identify with some of the prideful people, or maybe some of the people that show humility? All my life I have a bit of I can do it myself attitude. I don't know about you, but I have a bit of I can do it myself. If I want to win judo tournaments, well, I'll just train harder. If I want to pass my maths test, I'll just study more. If I want to just pass, I'll study less. If I want to get an A, I'll study more. I have this a bit of a can-do attitude in my life. I can do this, I can do that, I can fix my car, I can build that, I can do this. It's kind of just how I am. And there's an element where it is prideful, so I can do this, I can do that. But I also really enjoy the challenge of trying to build things I didn't think I could and all the rest of it. So there's an element where I still really enjoy it. But it also comes down to pride and not humility. And so when I became a Christian and got saved, although I had faith in Jesus that I would be saved, but I still had a lot of things of I can do it myself. Bible reading, I can do that. Church attendance, I can do that. Some youth, I can do that. And it was still a very much I can do it myself attitude. I was essentially trusting in my own works for my salvation. And we see this play out really well in Luke chapter 18, verse 9. It says this. Jesus is telling a story to some Pharisees. He says this in Luke 18 verse 9. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee is the religious person who does really well, apparently. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all that I got. But the tax collector, and tax collectors back then were kind of known thieves. They were Jews that would work for the Romans, and they would essentially say to people, they would take money from the Jews and they'd give it to the Roman government. And they would say, if they owed $10, they'd say, you owe 15. And they'd pass on $10 to the government and they'd keep 5 themselves. And they were essentially just extorting money from the Jewish people. So they're thieves and not very well liked. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus said, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before the Lord. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And so here I was, essentially trusting in my own works for salvation. And then I had a tragedy hit my life where it was out of my control. And that was like the first time where I was like, okay, I'm actually not in control of life. That happened, and I'm now not in control. And that was the first kind of chink in my armor of like, maybe I'm not as in control as much as I thought I was. And then a few years later, another tragedy hit my life, and I was like, okay, everything is completely out of my control, as much as I thought. And then we had Rocky, our son, then we had Bonnie, our daughter. And I remember once we had 2 kids, I remember saying to my wife, man, I have way less time for myself, like way less time. And it's awesome. I love it. But I used to have, I didn't even know how much back then, but let's say I had 2 hours a day to myself and I only have 1 because now I've got 2 kids to look after. It's just a really, really busy lifestyle. I remember saying to my wife, man, I'm just realizing how selfish I am and how much I want to do my own thing and have my own time. And it was around about this time that I read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero. And I remember reading it, and he's really big on silence, solitude, self-reflection, journaling. And so I started doing all those things. And it was over the course of, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 months. I'm not exactly too sure, but journaling and self-reflecting and just kind of thinking about my thoughts, behaviors, attitudes, habits, and just going, oh my gosh, I am not as good as I think I am. I am a massive, massive sinner. And I've shared this before. I've shared this time and time again. It's essentially my salvation story, really. And then I just realized in that I need saving, and there's nothing I can do to save myself. Only Jesus can do that. And it was then that I just cried, repented of my sin, of my selfishness, of my pridefulness, of everything that I thought that I was in control of, but really I wasn't. And I think it was then that I really and truly became a Jesus follower. And so essentially, I was focusing on my own pride, was focusing on my own works. And Ephesians 2:8 says, it's for grace that you have been saved by faith, and it's not from works. I'll just find it for you. So that no man can boast, essentially. And so if you and I do good works and we get to heaven based on those good works, then Jesus died in vain. In actual fact, we only get to heaven and we only have a relationship with the Father through what Jesus has done for us, and nothing what we have done for ourselves. And it was in that moment that I realized I understood my own sin, and I humbled myself and repented and followed Jesus all the days of my life. In the Table Talk magazine, it says this: when we truly reflect on the weight of our sin and misery, selfish pride quickly deflates. Consider Paul, who rather than boasting in all his achievements and merits, began his writing as a chief of sinners in 1 Timothy. Furthermore, when we truly understand the good news of Jesus Christ, selfish pride and boasting find no room in our hearts. As Horatius Bonar declared, I love because he loved me. I live because he lives. And then goes on to talk about that whether we are prideful, we're focusing on ourselves, or whether we're humble, we're focusing on ourselves. Instead, we need to be focusing on Christ and what he has done for us. He is our focus. In Colossians 1:16, it says, all things are created in him, through him, and for him. In Acts 3:15, it says that you killed the author of life, that Jesus is the author of life, that he is our King and our Savior. And hopefully as I read the word, I pray, I hang out in community, I can slowly conform into the image of Christ. So as I humble myself and I put him where he needs to be, which is King of my life and King of the world, and I humble myself that I am a sinner that needs saving. But through the help of the Holy Spirit, I can slowly conform into an image of Christ and then just bear witness to him in the world. So as I draw a close, here are some questions. What does God's grace mean to you? What does his grace mean to you? And how have you submitted to God in your life? And was it easy or was it hard? I was also going to say that all through life, I often find for myself, because I'm a do-it-myself sort of person, is that I toss between, I'll do it myself, God, actually I really, really need your help. I'll do it myself, God, actually I really, really need your help. And so it might be and so what I've found over the course of my life, I've had to really, really stressing about my kids and all the stuff that's going on, with kids in general. And I've had to give them to God and be like, okay, God, I've actually been focusing all this on myself, and I need to give them to you. My business, freaking out about my business and actually going, oh my gosh, God, I actually need you in my business. I know someone here at our church that does communion every day, and he just said, I can only do my business because of God's grace to help me in my business. A friend of mine's reading a lot of business books, and a lot of the top level Christian businessmen, they said that a lot of them anyway, from the books that he's read, they've kind of gone in partnership with God in the business. So they're business partners with him. And so there's another way of going, you're including God and giving him the business and not yours. And so I'm finding over my life, as I reflect, I'm picking up prideful things there and putting them down over here, and I'm picking them up and I'm putting them down. And so there's an element where we are tossing and throwing between living our own life and doing what we want to do, but also, and then going, oh my gosh, no, God, but you're in control. And if you read just after James chapter 4, verse 10, it says, after he says that God gives grace to the humble and he opposes the proud, just afterwards, he talks about when people say, I'm going to go to this city and I'm going to do this and I'm going to go this and I'm going to do that. And God says, here you are. You're a mist in the daytime. You don't know where you're going to do, where you're going to go, what you're going to do tomorrow. So it's kind of another element of just like God's in charge and God's in control. And so I guess that's my message for you this morning. What does God's grace mean to you? How have you submitted to God in your life? And was it easy or was it hard? And maybe if they're pretty easy questions, maybe to share your salvation story with your house church. How did you become a Christian? What were some of the thoughts? What were some of the barriers for you to become a Christian? Anyway, that's it for me. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.